Hi, and welcome to the MAPE Resolution Forum. My name is Darcy Wing, and I serve on the Delegates Assembly Taskforce, and I will be facilitating this forum. In just a few minutes, we'll jump into the resolutions. Authors of the resolutions will present the resolutions, and then we'll provide time to take questions. We'll use the Q&A function to submit your questions. So that's in the bottom of your screen. What is a resolution? A resolution is a formal request to change the Constitution, election rule, policy, or bylaw. A perk of being in the union is that we govern ourselves, so we get to have our voice in our own process. Resolutions are at the heart of Delegates Assembly. The resolution process is designed to make our union stronger and more effective. So thank you to our members who have submitted resolutions. Before we jump into the forum, I have a few housekeeping items for you. This forum is being recorded and will be posted on the Delegate Assembly webpage on mape.org. We have the auto captions on, and we will pause for questions after each resolution is explained. You can enter your question into the QA feature in Zoom or raise your hand and unmute when called upon. We will show each of the resolutions while they're being discussed. You might find copies on the Delegate Assembly webpage at mape.org. As we prepare for DA, there are a few reminders for our delegates and alternates. We have 2 additional resolution forums, so please make sure all delegates and alternates in your region are able to attend at least one. The other 2 will be on Tuesday, October 10th at 5 p.m. and Thursday, October 19th at 12 p.m. There's a parliamentarian overview to review Robert's Rules of Orders on Monday, October 6th at 1 p.m. This will be recorded, but please try to make it the live event if possible. Either way, please review Robert's Rules of Order documents in the portal before DA. Lastly, the Finance Work Group is holding additional budget forums to walk through the budget that delegates will vote on during Delegates Assembly. These are upcoming on Tuesday, October 3rd at noon, Thursday, October 5th at noon, and Thursday, October 24th at noon. Delegates and alternates should attend at least one of these forums. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Chet Bolden, who is also a member on the Delegates Assembly Task Force. Take it away, Chet.
Hi, thank you, everyone. And thanks for coming here today. We are going to talk about the 3 resolutions. 1 second here. So the Constitution and Rules Committee has set the formal order we'll take to take up resolutions at DA. And we have 3 resolutions that'll be presented. The first one is replacing the regional chief steward with regional lead steward. The second is statewide officer and regional director term limits. And the third is updating election rules to change the timeline for negotiations representatives and DA delegates and DA alternates. So we're going to go through these one by one. We have the authors of the resolutions here to talk about them. And we'll pause after each one, like Darcy said, for questions. So let's start with the first one. The lead authors are Kay Pedretti. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. And Hallie Rosteberg. Please go ahead, Kay and Hallie, or Haley, unmute yourself and tell us about the resolution.
Hi, everybody. Kay Pedretti. I work at Winona State University as a college lab specialist. So I work with fun, exciting stuff like parasites, bacteria, molds, and human body parts. But hopefully that doesn't disgust you too much during lunch. My resolution here that I'm part of, I don't know if the other co-author is here or not. I'm gonna guess that means she's not.
I'm here. I'm just having problems finding the mute button and all that.
Okay, no problem. This this resolution is simply to replace regional chief steward with lead steward. Because the union strives to be inclusive, and whereas the use of chief can be offensive, we have a resolution to make that change. I know that many business agents already use lead steward, as well as many locals. And so we're trying to keep language as neutral as possible and eliminate anything that might be marginalizing any group of people. So there are alternatives to chief, and lead steward seems like the one to go with. And so that is what this resolution is about. I will tell you that I work at Winona State. I think I pointed that out already. We begin every large gathering of the full university talking about the Dakota people and the land that we are on. It's a tradition or that has happened most of my 23 years here. And it's something that we want to make sure that we are not being offensive to the Native American populations that and the indigenous populations that here in Winona. I will also say that Minnesota State has been working on, as a whole, has been working on removing chief from their titles, i.e. Chief Diversity Officer. We know here at Winona State, we've never actually had a Chief Diversity Officer. We've always had a different title, and at the moment, I'm not sure I can name that, but it is a title that we've never used on this campus, and so it seems odd to me that we do use that in a union. Sorry, you can go to the next slide. So this just points out just the elimination of the word chief, and lead would go in there. So this would happen throughout the documents in both bylaws and policy and at MAPE. So again, here's another example that is up there. And here is an example from the Constitution. I've forgotten there's one there as well. Are there any questions about this resolution?
Yes, Kay, just one question, and maybe this is also for President Dayton. Mike Prideaux asks, is there anywhere in our contract that this also would need to be changed, and should we add that to the resolution? Where would you like to add that to the resolution?
That's a good thought, and the contractual language is bargained each year, or I'm sorry, not each year, but every other year, and so that would be something we could do in about 1.5 years, but it's not something we could do right now. That would be something we would bring to negotiations and say, we propose this technical change. And it's rare that that MMB or the state does not agree to a technical change. So I don't see that being the issue. I see this as an issue that we ourselves need to resolve first, and then take it to the contract during negotiations.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Mary Heim. How many members have voiced concerns about the term chief steward?
I know both members. I'm not sure I can give you a number. There have been many members that have voiced a concern. There have been many business agents who have voiced a concern. There have been stewards who have voiced a concern. That doesn't mean everybody's voiced a concern, but there have been a number of people voicing concerns about this.
And I'll just add, this concern has been brought up for several years now. It's not just recent.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. Just had one other comment. Someone noted that we've had conversations with Native folks on avoiding the use of the word chief in a title. The word chief is defined as a leader or ruler of a people or clan. I'm not sure if that's helpful or pertinent, but it was raised in the chat, so feel free to respond if you like.
Is the concern or question, just to make sure I heard it correctly, have there been conversations with Native or Indigenous populations about this? Is that what you're asking? I'm just trying to make sure.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. And then they're just sort of following up on that and saying, how that is defined. And so maybe they're just supporting the fact that it doesn't really apply, to stewards anymore.
Okay. I would say yes, there are natives who have had conversations with MAPE members about this. There are native populations, again, that have had conversations about this where I work at Winona State. And again, chief is not looked upon as a title that they like to see outside of their population.
Great, thank you. Okay, that looks like it for questions right now. Can we go to, I guess we do have something in the chat. Just as a reminder, if you are submitting questions, please submit them to the Q&A feature so that we can see them. Let's take a look at the chat real quick.
I wonder if we could ask the authors of the resolutions to talk through their process of committee endorsement, if any, also.
Yeah, that's a good question. Kay, have you had any endorsement from committees?
There is not an endorsement from a committee on this particular resolution. It was brought forward to ERC, where the chief stewards meet. If you're not Employee Rights Committee, that would be what ERC stands for. So, and they did not endorse it. So that, yeah, there's not a committee endorsement on this.
Okay. Are you looking to bring it to any other committees?
Since Delegate Assembly is at the end of October, no, I don't think that is going to happen before then.
Okay. We did check the contract. Looks like there are 4 times where the term chief is used, and so something to keep in mind if this passes to follow up on. Okay, if you want to move to the next slide, Todd.
Before we
Chat,
go
there
on,
are 2 more questions.
Oh, we're back to the questions. Okay. Back to the Q&A thing here. So another question, is there thinking that using the word chief would stop being used in other areas of MAPE? I think that would be the hope. We change it in our bylaws, our constitution, eventually our contract. That sends a signal that, that's not something not a word that we support using, when discussing union operations. But first things first here, I think, is the resolution at hand.
Yeah, I am aware that there is a possibility of being a position that is called chief of staff, and I'm quite well aware of that, and that is something that technically hasn't been. Well, I take that back. I think as of the last board meeting, it is an official position. So I take that thought back. But until the last board meeting was not an official position. It was certainly talked about, and I think that was what people were hoping to call it, and at the moment it is called that. But it's in the person in that position is on in a trial or temporary basis, maybe, I can't think of the right word. So it is not it is not it has not been formalized into that position other than on a trial basis, I would say at this point.
Great, thank you. Just one other comment. Many police departments are moving to remove this title as well. For those on the call, and this is happening in other places, so it's maybe something to know at K.
Yep.
The DA.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, moving on to the next. This one, statewide officer and regional director term limits. We have the lead authors, Angie Halseth and Kay Progetti. Kay again. This was passed by the governance committee. Go ahead, Kay and Angie. Tell us about this resolution, please.
I'm going to check if Angie is here. Maybe she's not. Okay. No problem. I can talk about it. Statewide officer and regional director term limits. So over the last couple of years, statewide officers have become, and elected leaders have become more and more the face of our union of MAPE. MAPE, in my 23 years as a member of this union, has always been called a member run and led union, but I think I've seen it more in practice in the last 3-ish years or so. And with that in mind, it's really imperative that elected leaders have time to get experience in their position. And this resolution would help them do that. MAPE currently for statewide officers and regional directors has a 2-year term for both of those types of offices. So vice president, president, statewide secretary, statewide treasurer. So all those statewide executive committee offices, as well as chair of the organizing council and chair of political sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So all the executive committee offices are 2 years. Board of directors are 2 years at this point too. So limiting them to 2 years is creating a smaller amount of knowledge that each of them has as when they're only allowed to be there for 2 years. A lot of people look at this and say, you know, it takes me about 2 years to learn the office. And so because of that, we are asking for an expansion of the term. If you could go to the next slide, I think. Okay, this is where it is. Okay. So we're asking that the term go from 2 years to 4 years, and that term limits, the term limit language is deleted here. If you go to the bottom of the slide, it says term limits apply. Oh, it just went away. Term limits apply even if, oh no, that's not what I'm looking for. Is it, could you go to the next slide? Maybe it's on there. I'm just trying to remember. Oh, nope. Okay.
I think it's in the middle part that's crossed out.
Okay, thank you. Oh, there it is. It is. Statewide and regional officers shall be eligible to serve for no more than 3 consecutive terms in the same office. So that is being eliminated as well. So what that would mean is that statewide officers and regional directors would be elected for 4-year terms and would not have any limit of terms applied to them. Right now, it's a 2-year term and there is a limit, meaning that they can only serve 3 consecutive terms in a statewide or a regional director kind of office, the same office. So let's say Megan was treasurer first and then became president, though treasurer years would not apply to her presidential years. So it's in the same office. I think that, yeah, and then organizing council and political council are also included in this. And so there's some language that we added, thanks to John Ferrara later on, to make sure that that is included in this language as well. That was missed in our first round of making this. So this just clarifies that. And then the provisos at the end of the document would be eliminated except for number 1. And current meet and confer chairs are deemed to have been elected. That would stay, but the other ones would be taken out of the language. Are there any questions about this resolution?
Hey, can you also talk about the path to committee consideration for this one?
Thank you. I am on the governance committee as Megan, who just joined us or joined in and asked me to talk about this. The governance committee did endorse this resolution. And so that is that besides Angie and I working on writing this, the governance committee did help us out and endorse it. Like I said earlier, John Ferrara did help us out a bit too and realized there was some language we had been missing. So there were lots of hands in this, making this resolution the way it is today.
Thank you, Kay. We do have some questions. Start from the top.
Yeah.
Question about does this limit consecutive terms or total terms?
Neither. Right now, consecutive terms are limited. So you can have the same office 3 cycles in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Our terms are 2 years. And so right now, as a regional director, I could be a regional director for my region, 3 terms, 3 2-year terms in a row. This resolution would get rid of that particular thing. It would make my term 4 years, and there would not be a limit on the number of terms that I could hold, consecutive or non-consecutive, either one.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Do we know the history of why the limits were initially stated or started?
Yeah, I think it was 6 years ago, so maybe about 6 or 7 delegate assemblies ago. My hunch would be it might be 7 delegate assemblies ago, because we would have had to implement this the next round of elections. And I think there was thoughts that had been some people in statewide offices for many years, and I think people were looking to have some change. And so that's how it came about, from my understanding. I recall being at that delegate assembly. There was definitely a lot of different opinions about it, but the delegate assembly did vote it up, I think 7 years ago.
Okay. Then we have a couple questions about, the reason for adding the term limits. We have one specifically, what was there a reason why there shouldn't be term limits? And then a couple just saying, generally, 12 years should be enough. So it sounds like there's a lot of support for extending the terms, but a lot of questions about why removing the term limits. Can you speak to why both of those are in this resolution?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, comment. I think there's a couple things going on. MATE members have the ability to elect right now, every 2 years for a statewide office. So we're trying to give the power back to MAPE members and let them choose who should be president, vice president, regional director. By putting limits on it, we are actually in some ways kind of tamping down the power of our individual voters. And so I think that's part of why, you know, that kind of goes into the mix. Just to go back to the 4-year question, or, you know, why that's being expanded. Just to be clear, that has to do with learning your office or your position. Regional director has a, you know, if you come from a local and you come into the board of directors as a regional director, there's a big learning curve. There's a lot to know. There's a lot to get up to speed on. And in your first year, 2 years in your first term, you know, by the end of the term, you might, you know, not even feel completely up to speed on what's going on. And so by expanding it to a 4-year term, we're giving room for that regional director to learn their position and then actually be, you know, fully effective in their position. So that's the reason for the 4 years. The reason not to have term limits has to do with, again, giving power back to our MAPE members and letting them decide who should be in those positions. Now that we have made the face of MAPE more, statewide officers are more the face of MAPE than they have been in the past, that I think is an extremely important thing, that we're giving the power back to our MAPE members and letting them choose those offices.
Thank you. Another question. If this is passed, this resolution, when would it go into effect? This question comes from Mark Snyder. He says, I'm running for another term as regional director. Would my new term now be 4 years if I win election?
You know, that is a good, excellent question. There is likely an amendment coming forward, and I am not caught up on my emails, but I know I have several emails on this, and I just got here in time for the forum. But I believe there's an amendment coming forward that would define that, and that I think the amendment that's being brought forward would say that we could reopen elections. And right now, statewide regional directors, local officers are all open. If it's your cycle to be open, those nomination period is open right now. If this amendment comes forward and is passed, it would allow for nominations to reopen for a period of time, maybe a week, and put new candidates in there. And so the answer to Mark's question specifically is yes, if this resolution is passed, Mark's new term likely would be for 4 terms if this amendment passes. As the resolution is written right now, it actually does not define it. And so that's the reason for the amendment that will likely come forward Friday, October 27th.
Great. We're also having some procedural questions. So several folks again are kind of split on this. And they have questions. Is there a way for people to propose splitting these into multiple resolutions come DA?
I think there's a procedure called splitting the question. I'm not sure if I have my parliamentary procedure all up to date in my head, but there is a possibility that we could divide the question. That might be the right word for it, or the right term for it.
This is Chris Smith. Splitting the question is the correct
Is it? Okay.
way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
John, do you want to
Okay.
talk about the amendment?
Yeah, that's okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, John.
Yeah, so there's So there's a couple different ways to go about it. The way the resolution is written right now, and the way Robert's rules work, if it were passed as is, it would go into effect immediately. And that would make the current terms extended to 4 years. So one way to deal with that would just be to simply add a proviso that make sure that people understand that's the interpretation, that those elections would be canceled. If the members want to have elections for those, then the alternative would be what Kay suggested, to be add an amendment to reopen nominations for people who are term limited this time around. So it'll be up to Delegate Assembly to decide what path they want to choose for that. But if it were passed as is right now with no amendments, those elections would be canceled because those terms would be extended to 4 years, and then there it wouldn't be time for that election to happen. So it'll be up to the delegates to decide which path they want to take. Do they want to have an election this cycle and reopen nominations, or do they simply want to extend things? And if there are no competitive races in any of those districts, then that's, information that the group will have to take into account on its own. But as it stands right now, without an amendment, those elections would be canceled and the terms would be extended. So the next election would be in 2 years.
Thanks, John. That's helpful. We have
then
several
the
more
one-
questions in the chat, but Kristen has had her hand up for quite a while. Kristen Loomer, would you like to ask your question, Kristen?
Yes, thank you. My biggest concern is on the removal of the consecutive term limit portion. So I am interested in more of this split decision type thing. I like the initial part of, the reasoning behind this, extending the term to 4 years, but we have presidential elections, that we say you can only run twice. I think name recognition is huge, and that I think that many members, not all, aren't as involved. And so if they see the same name, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, nothing's, it doesn't hurt me to vote for the same person because it is less work on me trying to figure out who anybody running against them really stands for. So I think to have the same person in possibly forever isn't helping. So I would like to see basically the opportunity to vote on it separately.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen.
Thanks.
We have a couple comments right along those same lines around just name recognition, and that having no term limits would actually have unintended consequences where members are not as engaged. Also, we already have a lot of turnover on committees, even just in a 2-year cycle where we have special elections. So extending this to 4 years seems to that might also be an unintended consequence. We might have to have more special elections and put more on the shoulders of staff to carry those out. So Mark Schneider also has his hand up. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, I'm wondering if the proposers of this resolution put any thought into the potential for stagnation among the officers. If you have a bunch of regional directors, or if you have statewide officers that have held their positions for many years, if there is a concern about not getting new ideas into the mix that would come with new people being elected periodically.
Mark, that's a great comment. I understand where it's coming from, and certainly open to some thoughts from others on that too. I get where you're coming from, and if I think back to you know, 7-ish years ago when this became a thing, that probably had something to do with it. So it's a good comment. Certainly open to amendments about that or splitting. Okay, I already forgot the right word, splitting the question. So certainly open to that kind of thing.
Great. It sounds like this is a lot of this conversation is going to continue at DA. A lot of good points raised here today. Kay, I hope it gives you something to consider and prepare for ahead of DA so we can have productive conversations.
Thank you.
Before we move on, Chet, can I just make a quick comment? One thing that was raised at the board meeting last time and is this also helps staff at MAPE. So because they have to monitor who's up, whose term limits are up and figure out who's up for election and all of that. So it would help staff out a great deal.
Thanks. One other question we had just in the chat. Is it possible to add, or is there a removal clause in case a leader is not aligned with the interest of its members? That might already exist in our bylaws or constitution. Can anyone speak to that?
I can just say that there's a section in our bylaws that covers the judicial procedure, which would it could result in the removal of an officer for bad conduct, like embezzlement or something like that, of actions that are not in alignment with the members. And that applies to anybody who's in a position.
Great, thank you. Okay. More comments about splitting the question. And then we have one that from Jason Bonnet about how many current directors are due to term out of office. If anyone knows that answer off the top of their head. Okay, Megan?
I think there's 3 of us. I'm one of them.
3.
There's 4, I believe, actually, totally 4. Maybe 3 who would run again if they were able to. That's my understanding of the numbers.
Yep, you're right, Kay. 4, but yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on. Thank you everyone for your questions and discussion. About 20 minutes left here. So as a reminder, we will have more resolution forums. So if you'd like to continue this discussion there, please join those as well. The last resolution for consideration at DA is to update election rules to change the timeline for negotiations representatives and DA delegates. The third resolution has been submitted by John Ferreira and Kristen Kirchhoff-Franklin. This has been passed by the negotiations committee. So I'll turn it over to John and Kristen.
Thanks, Chet. First of all, I see we've had over 70 people here today. That's awesome. So the history of this is a couple of years ago, we moved the statewide elections to happen in the fall instead of the spring. And this year is the first year that we have done consolidated statewide elections in the fall. For a while, we had different schedules for different elections. So what we discovered when this current election cycle started, we were still wrapping up negotiations. And so the chairs of the negotiations committee came to the executive committee and said, hey, this is problematic where we're having to run for the next negotiation cycle while still working on the current one. Is there a way we can address this? And so we worked with them to draft this resolution to change the timeline for when we elect negotiations reps. I think it benefits everybody to change that time. It gives members a chance to evaluate the performance of their negotiations reps. It allows the negotiations reps to finish up their work on a contract before having to run again. And it gives the negotiation reps time to reflect and see if they have the time or if they have the right situation to do there. And so by having the creating a process by which instead of having it regularly scheduled, we have the statewide elections committee call a special election to do that. That gives us flexibility. So we don't have to change the bylaws if we want to change when we start the negotiations time. And we can do it closer to when we want to start negotiations. So we can be done with one contract before moving on. When we were discussing this with the MAPE staff involved in carrying out our elections, they mentioned to us that we have a similar problem with the delegates and alternates for DA, that we were electing them a year in advance, and that created a lot of strain on our system and on the delegates. It's hard to know what you're going to be doing a year from now and if you're going to be available. So we thought it would be easy to use the same mechanism to elect people to delegate assembly. And this also means that we don't have to worry about changing the bylaws or the election rules if we want to change when we have delegate assembly. There's nothing that says we have to do it in October. We could do it any other time of year as well. So that's what this resolution does. It removes the negotiations reps and the delegates and alternates for delegate assembly from the hard-coded, so to speak, elections timeline, and grants the statewide elections committee the authority to call a special election to fill those positions that is more compatible with when those events are going on. Any questions?
Okay, thanks, John. We're flipping through a couple more slides here to show how this would change in our bylaws and constitution.
So, can you go back one, please?
Mhm.
So I just want to call this out because this question came up on the last resolution as well. So we included that as a proviso because we have a current ongoing election for the 2024 delegate assembly and for the negotiations that start next cycle. Our interpretation of the bylaws and the election rules is that if this resolution is passed as is, then the current ongoing elections would be canceled for those next cycles. So we would move to that new process, and those delegate assembly and alternates and the negotiations reps would not appear on the ballot this fall.
John, can you talk about your process for committee endorsement, please?
So, sure, thanks. This was made at the request of the negotiations committee. And so after the language was finalized, we shared it with the negotiations committee, and at their wrap-up meeting, they voted to endorse this resolution. And we figured that the delegates could vote on it at the delegate assembly, which would also be the relevant group.
Great, okay. Thank you, John and Kristen, for putting together that resolution. Any questions on this one?
Put everyone to sleep.
Yeah. Thanks, John, for going through that. I don't even need to be here.
Anything to add, Kristen?
No, I don't. He didn't. John said everything. So does no questions mean we're good? I'm a little leery of no questions.
You know, I have one that just, I think people are maybe a little confused. So can you just read, just kind of, you know, and succinctly sum up, right? So what this would change, when elections would move to for
This,
negotiations and for DA, for delegates.
this specifically removes negotiations representatives and delegates and alternates for delegate assembly from the official consolidated statewide election that we have every fall. And in its place, it has the statewide elections committee call a special election at a time that is closer to delegate assembly or closer to the start of negotiations, so that the pool of candidates can have a proper time to evaluate their interest, and that we're not doing overlapping negotiations and electing people a year in advance.
So
Yeah.
the new timeline for those elections would not be defined in this
Correct.
resolution.
That was done on purpose in case we wanted to move the start of negotiations, or if we wanted to move delegate assembly to a different time of year. We want to get to a point where we don't have to change a bylaw or an election rule if we want to reschedule something.
So one question then from Mike Prideaux. Does the statewide elections committee then call that special election, or would that be the board of directors?
Technically, the statewide elections committee calls the elections. They're the ones with the authority to do that. However, the board can ask them to do that, and we anticipate that. Actually, I think it actually says the board asks them to do that in one of them. If you can go forward a couple slides. I can't remember, it's changed. We went through different drafts. Go back one more, wait, yeah. Go back one more. Go back again. Yeah, I don't remember, but the board of directors has the authority to ask the statewide elections committee to do that.
Actually, go forward like 3 slides, would you, Todd? One more, I think. I think it's this one here.
Yeah, on a date set by the board of directors. So the board will set the date and the elections committee calls it.
Great, thank you. I have a question, I guess, on this one. Has staff been consulted on, you know, what it would take to do those special elections, and are they comfortable with kind of the ambiguity, you know, of the timing on those?
Yeah, we worked very closely with staff. We wanted to take that workload into account with them, and I can let Todd Mackey speak to that more if he'd like.
Hey, thanks, John. So as the operations director here, I get to oversee the staff working on administering elections for us. And this would be a cycle that says we're going to have a regular fall elections in the fall for the majority of our positions, and then most likely have a single special election in the spring to catch up with any officers that are missed, delegates and alternates for delegate assembly for that next fall, and then negotiations representatives for the next contract cycle. So it's likely to be like a twice a year kind of process. The regular elections in the fall and then a special election in the spring. And that's a really manageable workload for us.
And then I answered a question that was in the Q&A. The person says that it's their first time participating in DA, so thank you and welcome. Or these forums. So if they appreciate the forums given. They want to know if the PowerPoint will be able to be available for them to look at. I did put in the chat the link to MAPE and to Delegate Assembly, and all of the resolutions are on there, so you can review them.
Hey, John, can you talk about the impact of potential passage of the prior resolution that would modify the length of terms and term limits on the potential passage of this resolution?
Sure. This resolution speaks to delegates and alternates for DA and negotiations reps, which are outside of the scope of the previous resolution. Those terms are defined in other places. So I don't anticipate there being an issue other than people trying to keep track of who are we electing this cycle.
Let me be more specific. If the prior resolution passes where we have elections for a specific position every 4 years, we would move to a point where we have statewide elections every 2 years because of the cycle of even and odd regions, and then the statewide officers also. So this resolution would then be somewhat even more necessary than it is now, because we have delegate assembly every year and negotiations every 2 years.
But to be clear, the regional office, we'd still have regional local elections every other year. So there would be a local election every year for some locals. Yeah, but President Dayton's right. Like, this would be more necessary if the previous one passed.
One final question here. Someone said, I thought we just elected delegates for this year. And that wasn't a year out, so.
We had a special election for the delegates for this year because the term for the previous year expired. And we are in the middle of an election right now we're accepting nominations for delegates for the 2024 Delegate Assembly. So we held a special election over the summer for this year's delegates. And we're in the process of electing the ones for 2024, which is why we're doing this.
Makes sense. Okay.
But that's a good
and
question.
just to reiterate, if this passes, the current election for 2024 delegates would be postponed until basically the special or the statewide elections committee calls for that to.
I would say it's canceled until it's called again, because we'll go through the whole process where they'll accept nominations and
Okay.
all of that stuff. We won't be
basically.
taking like the current ballot and just doing it a different time.
Great, thanks. Jason Bonnet.
Yeah, thank you. Just in response to John's previous statement, when I look at the election notice on the MAPE website, that talks about the open positions, it talked about the statewide offices, the political council, negotiations rep, those local officers, as well as regional negotiations rep, and some special elections for some directors, but I don't see delegate assembly listed in any of that. So I don't know if I missed that, or it's just kind of an FYI, an informational comment to John. So maybe I misunderstood, but I didn't think we were electing delegate assembly delegates for 2024 in this election. At least I don't see that in the notice anywhere. So please correct me if I'm mistaken.
Jason, can I, and John, do you mind if I jump in?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, as the operations director, yeah, Jason is correct. We have not posted those delegate positions for this year or for this election cycle for next year as part of this year's election. Because our rules require us to hold them during each year. This year, we've held those, but in a special election because their terms were expiring for this cycle, right? So we've actually got a problem with delegates for next year, and we'll need to call a special election for them in order for them to be at next year's delegate assembly. So it's confusing language, right? But John, I didn't want to call you out in front of everybody, but I think you just got mistaken because we have not posted those positions for the following year.
No, you're right. I was wrong.
And thank you, Todd, for that. That was my understanding. And John, I didn't mean to call you out either. I was just trying to clarify it so people, understood. So thank you very much.
Right,
No,
everyone might be scrambling for their emails to see how they can vote on what's going on. So good,
Yeah,
good
no.
job, folks.
That's part of the purpose of this forum, so that we can spend this time ahead of time, making sure we're all on the same page and understand what the changes are and what the current state is and what we're asking to change. So no need to apologize. But I think more that, it shows why this is needed anyway. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, I don't have any other questions here. We do have a number of comments just saying that this resolution seems helpful and straightforward, and thank you for explaining it. So I wanted to pass those on to our authors. Finally, if there are any other final questions, we do have a couple minutes, but just so you know, this recording will be posted on the MAPE website. If you have questions about a specific resolution, the contact information for the authors for each proposal will be shared also on the website, as Darcy noted earlier. At this point, I don't see any other questions, and we are 1 minute to close. So that being said, I want to thank everyone for their time and attention to discuss these, to learn about these. Having this kind of discussion really helps things when we get to DA. Everyone kind of understands what's being asked and where kind of the points of debate might be. Appreciate your time. So enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to those who join us at the next forum. Thank you.